I'm Amanda Krugliak, curator at the Institute for the Humanities Gallery, and the current IH exhibition, Never Free to Rest, by Detroit artist Rashuan Rucker. The Institute for the Humanities has long been dedicated to bringing artists and thinkers, visionaries to the university, to Ann Arbor, and outlying communities, understanding the potential for artists to find creative solutions to real-world problems, rather than picking up where we left off, or, so where were we? This historic new year, more than any other, offers opportunities to find new ways of seeing towards new futures. Rashuan Rucker's exhibition is our first exhibition at the Institute Gallery with in-person viewing since the winter of 2020, and we cannot wait to see you. Rashuan Rucker was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and attended North Carolina Central University and Marygrove College. As part of his extensive practice, he creates photographs, prints, and drawings, and has received over 40 national and state awards for his work. In 2008, Rucker became the first African American to be named Michigan Press Photographer of the Year. And that same year, he was awarded an Emmy for documentary photography focused on the pit bull culture in Detroit. He served as Maynard Fellow at Harvard University in 2009, a Hearst Visiting Professional at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 2013. He was awarded an artist residency at Red Bull House, Detroit, 2014, and the first awardee of their Detroit Artist Grant in 2019. Rashuan Rucker was named a Kresge Fellow for his drawing practice in 2019, a Sustainable Artist Foundation awardee in 2020, and was awarded a prestigious International Studies and Curatorial Program residency, also known as ISCP, in New York, 2021. Most recently, a series of his drawings from his notable Orthology series was purchased by the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Rashuan Rucker's exhibition, Never Free to Rest, represents the last works in his remarkable Orthology series and explores the rock pigeon as metaphor for the systemic debasement, mistreatment, and conditioning of Black men in America. Welcome, Rashuan Rucker.
Thank you.
It's so great to see you.
That always made me feel way more important than I actually am.
Well, I felt like I really needed to give that introduction because you've done so many things and you're such an amazing artist. I thought this morning, just because the students will be listening to us talk about this work, and some of them may be able to come and others this will be their, this exposure to it. I just thought maybe we would discuss some of the key pieces and this series, which you've been working on quite a while now. And maybe let's just start there. What brought you to this series? Or can you tell us a little bit more about the Orthology series and how we landed in this place?
We landed in this place actually after a studio visit with Detroit artist Tiff Massey. And me and Tiff had been studio partners in the Red Bull residency in Detroit. And I was coming out of doing a body of work about the homeless community in Detroit, and I already knew in my mind I wanted to do work about the condition specifically of Black men in America. And I was at her studio one night and I was telling her about this work that I wanted to do, and she was like, the best way for you to do it is find a very common thing that everybody knows about, not like a typical trope or not like, you know, a typical entryway into conditioning. And maybe several days later, I was walking to work on 4th Street, still working at the Free Press at the time, and there was popcorn and some food all over the sidewalk. And there was a gang of pigeons there. And they kind of had the span of the sidewalk. And I was walking through, and they wouldn't even move. They just kind of like eating it in a way. And I was like, oh my God, I hate pigeons. They're always in the way. They didn't even move when I walked through, and I'm a big person. And then it kind of just dinged to me, and I was like, oh my God, people hate us. They feel like we're in the way, and we're not necessarily a part of like the system in a fair way. Like they feel like we're eating off of the system, or like getting subsidies and all these things and scavenging for everything. And I'm like, oh my God, people hate us just as much as some people hate us just as much as they hate pigeons. And I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect comparison point. And the more I researched about pigeons, the more I was like, oh wow, I did not know this. I didn't know they were native to America, because forever, as long as I've been born, you've been seeing pigeons everywhere. And then you start to gain more and more knowledge about it, and how, because they've kind of become these things that live and survive and exist in urban landscapes, that they've managed to figure out how to eat off the scraps and the bread and the popcorn and the things we drop, because their natural foraging has kind of stopped because of the environment they're in. And so just the more I learned about it, I was like, wow, this might work, talking about a marginalized person in comparison to a marginalized animal, and how, their worlds interact.
And so when you started this project, had you done drawing and printmaking before? You had.
Yeah,
so you had done documentary photography, and then also had always done other kinds of work.
Printmaking and drawing was my first love. That's what I was studying in North Carolina Central, and when I went to Marygrove. And when I was in North Carolina Central, we had, and every college has this, where you have student art shows. And we had this student art show, and one of the professors was there for the opening, and he taught photography. And there was no quote unquote photojournalism at North Carolina Central. It was just one photography class. Now there is photojournalism, but then it was just one kind of standard photography class. And the professor sought me out in the opening, and he said, did you draw this? And I was like, oh yeah, that's my drawing. And he was like, have you ever thought about photography? And I was like, no, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in printmaking and drawing. And he said, you should take my photography class this summer. I'm going to be teaching it in the summer for one of the first times. And I was like, I got enough. I had already had 2 summer school classes. And I was like, look, I'm on grants. I don't have money to be kind of throwing around for extra classes. And then he said, no, just come sit in the class. I will let you just sit in the class and learn. And I was like, I don't even have a camera. And he was like, I will give you a camera. And so that's what he did. He let me sit in the class. He gave me a camera. He was like, all you have to do is do all the work I assigned. Oh. And so I did the work. It was okay. It wasn't great. It was decent. And at the end of the class, he was like, I'm going to introduce you to a friend of mine who knows another guy that needs a photo intern. It just happens to be in your hometown in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, at the newspaper. So they set the interview up, and I came in and I showed him my pictures, and I could tell by Charlie's face, his name was Charlie Buchanan. He was the director of photography there. He was not that impressed at all. And he was like, is this all you have? And I was like, yeah, this is my first time taking photography. And he was like, well, what else do you do? And I was like, I'm really, a printmaker and a draftsman. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. My wife teaches art at one of the colleges. And he was like, do you have your drawing portfolio? And I said, yeah. He said, well, let me have it, and I'll take it home and show it to my wife. And he took it home, and then the next day we met again, and I said, what did your wife say? And she said, I should hire you as my intern. And so that was how that became a thing. I mean, I pretty much learned on the job there, and that internship turned into an internship at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which turned into an internship at the New York Times Leadership Academy in New Orleans, which turned into a full-time job at the Free Press. And so it all kind of came full circle. And I remember asking, I was gonna say Larry, that was the name of the professor who taught the photography class. I was like, why did you even try to help me? And he said, he could tell by their drawings I understood composition. And that was half the battle in photography. He was like, you understood composition, you understood light, so I knew you could understand photography on a different level.
Yeah, and I think you look at your work, and to me, you always think about image and telling stories. you know, these very specific images that you create, you can see the connection between photographs and journalism and drawing, you know, and storytelling, whether you're working in one medium or another.
I think that's because secretly most people don't know this, but I've said it a couple times in like different artist talks. When I was working as a photojournalist at the Free Press, when I would go out to shoot assignments, in the back of my mind I would always say, how would I draw this?
Huh.
And that was how I would take pictures. And then when I was doing my art, the same thing, I'm like, how would I photograph this person? And so I would use both to inform each other. And that was kind of how, you know, I worked. And then the story was just always kind of naturally there, because I think as a journalist and artist, like at the foundation of it, you're just a great storyteller.
Sure.
But I would always say that. I would never tell people that when I would go out on assignments, no matter what it was, the Free Press, I'm like, how would I draw this? Like, what would this look like as a drawing? And that was how my mind would work while I was shooting photographs. And the same thing with the drawings. It was just like I would use both of them to like help me navigate whatever series I was in or whatever assignment I was at.
So let's get back to the images surrounding us, and just a couple questions that I think students might have. First, can you talk about the images, the portraits themselves, and what is the source material for the work?
So for a lot of the drawings, and I call this my American Orthology series, even though this show is Never Free to Rest. American Orthology is just the title I gave it as an umbrella for all of the work. Ornithology meaning the study of birds, and just, you know, America, the place we're at, the station we're at. And so for the portraits, the source material, mostly, it's probably 50-50 or sometimes maybe 70-30, you know, heavier on the side with people I know. And then some of the source material is from photos of people who are incarcerated, you know, what people would call mugshots. And some of them are like they're from different sites, like jailbirds, which is interesting that it's called jailbirds, and all these things. And what I do a lot of times with that source material is I collage them. Maybe I change the nose, the eyes, or I change the hairstyles, like, and I always do that in an instance of protection of the person that's incarcerated, to like not make it so much about them, but more about the story of mass incarceration. And so that's another thing about when I tell stories, you always got to think about who the stakeholder is, and it's like, it's not me, you know, it's whoever I'm creating or whatever. So I'm always thinking about, you know, like using those amalgamations to tell you what I'm trying to teach you, but not just necessarily saying, hey, this person is in jail, you know, and giving them a disguise. And most of the time I use friends and people I know, because they've had these same stories, the other person that might be incarcerated, with these, you know, chance encounters with like police officers, or just anything doing your regular life where, you know, you've been marginalized, or you've been redlined, or you've been in these places. So a lot of it's just taken from normal life and the people that I consider family and friends.
And I think, you know, when you create this hybrid portrait of bird and man, and we always think of birds as being a symbol of freedom, right? And then there's this tethering in the images that speak to the freedom and then the inability to fly.
Yeah, that's always been a thing where I always kind of thought like, wow, it's kind of cool that I came upon this and then using a bird, because when I think of freedom, a lot of times we think of the bird as the ultimate thing of freedom, because it can just get up and go to another space at any point in time. It never has to be in an environment. But the one thing that I found out about pigeons is they're one of the few birds that don't migrate. They're non-migratory. And so they've been that way because they've been displaced, and wherever they're placed at, it's imprinted on them like in a quick amount of time that this is home and you stay home. And so even this bird that is like considered one of the strongest flyers, like a pigeon is one of the fastest birds when it comes to just taking off horizontally. So this thing is built to fly never leaves this space, because now this space is home wherever it's been put there. And so it's an interesting concept when you talk about that, but then you also talk about being redlined and being put in these ghettos and these projects and these environments because of race and ethnicity, and not being able to necessarily escape, even though you have the ability to. And
because you're accustomed.
Because you're accustomed to it and get conditioned.
Right.
And you're conditioned by your circumstance. You know, it's like, you know, because when you think about schools, like schools are really propped by the tax dollars in the community. So if you're placed in this community that's being redlined and you don't have access to these same things, and the schools aren't as good as the other schools that are in different environments, and so you're being like kind of pushed down all along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such, you know, there's such powerful portraits that speak to this, you know, and just systemic issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, when I think about, you know, one of the books I always refer to was Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro. And it's like, he talks about, he has this quote in there that's like, if you make somebody go through the back door long enough, even when they can go through the front door, they will build a back door.
Right.
Because that's how you begin to function. And so those things become what you know, they become everything.
I want to talk about how important text is to this show, and you and I have had many conversations about this idea of field notes or a field guide to the show, and what that would include. And you incorporate quotes of Martin Luther King, or the title is from a Baldwin quote. And then you have really thorough context for each of the pieces. Talk to me about what that means for you, you know, why that's important, and how you think about the two working together as part of the show.
I think text always became important to me. One, because it's probably been something that's been around me forever. Not just being a journalist and being in newsrooms, but my father is a poet and a writer, and he teaches creative writing in English. And you know, that's always, the written language has always been important growing up. And one thing that made me really want to always include that type of text is just, I never wanted it to be erased. I never wanted to take, you know, anybody to have my work and be able to erase it or misalign it with something. So I've always wanted people to have a clear and concise like view of my viewpoint. Sure. And so I've always liked to have these notes and these texts, and I like to look at quotes and quotes to me, like they don't just inform the work, they're also things that I look at daily as far as sources of affirmations. I remember when I was in college, I had some type of marker that was like a glow light or something like that. But I wrote in really big letters on my dorm room wall, which probably is still there today, I've never ever painted over it, but I would cut out the lights and this neon glow would come on, and it was a quote from Frederick Douglass, and it said, "I glory in conflict that I may hereafter exult in victory." And that was like a thing for me, like I carried that quote through my entire college life, like just to be joyful in the struggle, you know, because I knew there was a better side of it. Like I was gonna come out on the other side of it, and even when times got rough, I would just be able to like look at that wall at night and like see this quote. And so quotes have always been, you know, not just knowledge, but like a place of affirmation for me.
Yeah.
And they become part of my work. And I love to use definitions because I want people, a lot of times things that are in my titles are direct reflection of the definition, like the literal Webster's dictionary definition of a word.
Yeah.
And so that's why people will see definitions repeated in a lot of my field notes or when I talk about my work, because I want you to know exactly like the very premise and foundation of the word that I'm using in the title or what it means in my work. And so when I was thinking about Never Free to Rest and having a name for the show, the Baldwin quote was just, you know, it says, "In America, I was free only in battle, never free to rest, and who finds no way to rest cannot long survive the battle." And it was always this thing in the back of my mind. It's like, he's not necessarily talking about battle, but like the consistent surveillance, the consistent, you know, burden of just trying to be black in America. not necessarily like a figurative, like we're trying to kill each other and that happens in instances, but not. He's talking about the burden of that, carrying of that, like, you know, the burden of like trying to vote, the burden of just trying to change things and make it right, you know, that constant, you know, state of not being able to rest, you know, like I think about, you know, a lot of the different things that's happened over time. It's like Ahmaud Arbery, it's like you're just trying to jog somewhere and all of a sudden you accosted and you get killed. And it's like he's probably jogging to try to get some type of rest or break away from something in his life. Most people go to exercise to get away from things, to better themselves, and you get killed in that act. And so those things kind of stay in the back of my mind. And when I thought about Never Free to Rest, I just thought about all these other quotes that I remembered through life that were like that. And the Martin Luther King quote was, you know, I'm tired of marching for something that should have been mine since birth. Like, I'm tired of fighting for like the rights that I should have always had. Like, this shouldn't be something I should be fighting for. This should be something that's given to me like it is to every other person in America. And so those quotes, you know, like they just inform my thinking on things. And I think one of the first books my mom ever gave me was like, you know, words of wisdom from African-American leaders. It was like these quote books. And she gave me like a couple of them. And I think one that she gave me before I went to college. And it was like one of those things that I was just always reading to affirm myself. And so I think just through my own, you know, reading of affirmations and different things and, you know, looking to these books, like those quotes have become part of my work.
I want to be sure and talk about the piece that's behind us, which for me felt like such a critical part of the exhibition and the project, in a project that you've been thinking about, we've been talking about for several years now. Can you talk about this piece, and then we can also discuss the experience of putting it together and installing it. But tell us a little bit more about the piece behind us.
The piece behind us is called I Hit More Than I Missed. And I always wanted to take the drawings and the bird work and take them to, you know, a 3D platform at some point.
So a clay pigeon, tell us, the clay pigeon is a small disc, right?
It's a small disc they use in like skeet shooting or trap shooting, and it's called a clay pigeon because they actually used to use live pigeons. And they almost, you know, from what I've read, almost like took pigeons like close to extinction, just shooting them for no reason, like in this sport. And so what they would do is they would capture the pigeon in a little trap, like a little box. And they would, you know, have it on the ground and they would release it. And it's interesting because I'm always thinking about the mindset of the pigeon. You being released and you're flying away and you're thinking everything is great. You don't know there's some dude standing to the left or the right with a gun that's about to shoot you as part of some game or sport. And at some point, somebody thought we should just stop killing pigeons for no reason. And they started making the clay pigeons, the little terracotta and clay disc. And they just kept the name pigeon because of the history. And you know, they would always use bright colors, orange, I've seen yellow, some different other colors, but bright colors was so they would stand out in any environment. And usually black on the bottom. And
so the color was really important for you.
Yes, the color was important for me because when I first saw what they looked like with the orange and the black on the bottom, the first thing I thought about was mass incarceration in prison suits and people that look like me from the black on the bottom, and literally black being on the bottom in the caste system in America. And so that was kind of where my brain took off a little bit. And then when I realized that they were using those colors to stand out against the environment or the sky or whatever backdrop, it's easier for you to see something orange flying in the air no matter where it's at because the color is so bright and it's, you know, it makes it stand out. And the more I started researching about the history of like prison clothing, that's when I realized why the prison clothing was orange, because it was for it to stand out in an environment, the same exact thing. And normally when you see prisoners in orange, it's when they're being transported. And so it's like because that's the moment in time they would most likely have a chance to escape. And if you escaped, what better way to find you if you got a bright orange jumpsuit on somewhere, you know, running around a city or wherever you're at.
Yeah.
And so it took on that similar meaning where, you know, it's a much easier target or reference, you know, when it's got that type of color to it and with that type of saturation. And
so this project, it was important to you that you make these to display, but also that part of the edition would be a number of them that would be broken.
yeah.
And tell us the, you know, the thinking behind that for you, or as to, you know, what are the two parts of this in regards to what's displayed and then what's broken?
Just the title, like I hit more than I missed, it came kind of from the vocabulary used in the sport too. They call a hit sometimes a kill, and they call a miss a bird away. And I just thought about myself and I was like, I'm a bird away. Yeah. Thinking about my neighborhood, thinking about people I grew up with, like I was kind of one of those people who got out of the circumstance. And a lot of my friends and some of my family got caught, you know, in the trap, and they got stuck there. And, you know, and I also think about people I know, as I was telling somebody the other day, I said, I know people who are still in jail for selling marijuana. They've been in jail for years. And as I ride around Detroit and other places, I see all these dispensaries, and some of them look like Target stores, and they door dashing marijuana. And I'm like, all the while this is going on, I know somebody who's been in jail for years for selling marijuana. I just think about how that system has just broken so many people. Yeah. And that's the representation of this, or just people not even necessarily who are incarcerated or been in mass incarcerated. I mean, all the people who've died at the hands of like police brutality or just racism, it's like they've been broken by this system and this caste system that's been long established in America from the very beginning. And so that's kind of the piece really just represents on the floor those things, and just memories of my own life and people I've lost and people I've seen broken.
I think when I was in here watching you break these plates and they start to accumulate and then they become this rubble and these faces that, you know, at first you have, there's value to the portrait, or it's a representation of a person and a life, and then to find it, you know, discarded in this way, to start to see that erasure, I think also as pieces go lower into this pile or are broken into parts, that all of that is just so painful and so, you know, so evident in the process of the piece. Watching you do this and thinking about these two ways of representing the portraits.
I think the reason the portraits all have the same face, and I wanted it that way, is because it speaks to how people, especially in this country, some people view blackness as a monolith, and like it's, you know, just this one thing. It's all black people are this way or this thing, and part of it just from personal experience. I remember leaving the Free Press one day, and I was with another colleague of mine, another black man who's an editor, and we're both editors, and we're like walking down the street, and it's probably like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and we're both in suits. And this like red pickup truck comes by, and they like scream out, "Go home, darky," and they're like screaming slurs and everything, and then the light is gonna catch them. And so we're looking at the light, and then I look at him and I'm like, it ain't worth it, man. Like, and they run the light anyway. And so I was sharing that story the next day with people I work with, and I'm like, this is what I mean. It doesn't have anything to do with who you are, the stature you might have achieved. It's about how I look. It's about my skin, my, you know, it don't matter that I won Emmys and won these awards. They don't see that. They just see a black dude walking down the street that they want to accost for no reason. You know, sometimes you think about it and you want to get to what we see a lot of times as black people, this better space, which usually better indicates white in some ways. Like you want to get your kid to a better school system or better this or better that. But then when you get there, you're not received with open arms. You know, I remember when I first moved to Grosse Pointe, the cops were getting called on me constantly for nothing until finally one day the police was like, "We know you live here." And I was like, "Thanks." Like, who's calling the cops on me? And they were like, "Well, we can't tell you, but we know you live here, so we won't be bothering you again." You know, one day it was like, there's a strange black man behind the garage with a suitcase. Yeah, it was me coming home from the airport, coming back from Boston. I'm allowed to have a suitcase and go into my house. And so it's just that type of heaviness. And I'm like, you can do all those things people tell you to do. You can comply, you can be the best, you can have everything they ask you to have, but it doesn't matter sometimes because they all see the same thing. They see danger or a threat.
Yeah. Well, I feel that this exhibition, you're so, you know, forthcoming and generous in telling your story, in being part of a bigger story, and the exhibition challenges us. It's really, you know, such an honor, truly, to work with you and to have been able to talk through these ideas of yours and see it all come together in this way. So thank you so much for spending a little time with me this morning. And I just hope everybody is able to come see the exhibition, which will be up through October 15th. Rashuan Rucker, thanks so much.
Thank you.